So this is my 2006 Acura TL, and as I'm about to show you, the headlights are in pretty rough shape. They're not terrible, nothing unusual for 2006, but what I want to do is see if I can't use some basic supplies to just refresh these headlights and get a little bit of that clarity back. So I'm going to be using in total about 50-60 bucks of cheap supplies. I'm going to start off with my sandpaper. We got a couple different grits. I'm going to start with a 600 and go all the way up to 2500, and that's going to remove most of the yellowness on here. And I want to use a wet sand, so I have my first couple sheets of sandpaper soaking in some warm water right now. And I'm going to use a little bit of this Armor All Auto Glass Cleaner just to help clean it out while I'm sanding. First of all, I grabbed a $2 roll of painter's tape just to mask off the edges and make sure I'm not sanding away any of the paint while I'm trying to sand the headlights down. Once it's sanded, I'm going to use this orbital sander and these buffing pads just to clear off the scratches and get it restored to that nice and clear look. While I'm buffing it, I'm going to apply some of this Maguire's plastix to the buffing pads while I buff and see if that doesn't help smooth it out a little bit. This cost me about $6 online. These buffing pads were about $15 for the set. You can pick up an orbital sander or polisher like this for about $15-20 bucks if you want to go for a cheap one, or you can spend about 10 bucks on a drill attachment. It sounded a little janky to me just to have a drill attachment, but actually if you're working on headlights, having a smaller attachment on the end of the drill would help you get a little more precise, so it's not a bad idea at all. Once I'm done, I'm going to apply a little bit of turtle wax just by hand with a microfiber cloth and see if that doesn't help the shine last just a little bit longer. So in total we're looking at about 65 bucks of supplies to do this, but like I said, after you're done, you'll still have most of the supplies left. My sandpaper came with about 50 sheets. I shouldn't have to use all 5 foam pads. I'll still have my orbital sander when I'm done with this, so as you can see, you can reuse most of these supplies. It's really a pretty cheap fix to clean up your headlights. But is it gonna work? Let's find out. The edges of the headlights are all taped off. I try to tuck the tape all the way across the edge of the metal beneath the headlight lens to make it easier for me to just sand the edges, not worry about the paint, and know I'm getting the whole headlight lens. I'm gonna start with 600 grit, which is the most coarse of my sandpaper. Then I'll move up all the way to 2500, which will be the finest grit. Alright, so at this point, I'm all the way up from the 600 to the 2000 grit on this right headlight, and you can see it's clearing up a little bit. On this left headlight, I made it as far as 1000 grit, and it's still very cloudy. But once you get up to those 2000 grit sheets, you can really feel those little scratches start to wipe away. Alright, that should do it for the sanding. I'm going to grab the orbital polisher and see if I can't buff these things off a little bit. So now I've got my extension cord. I'm glad I went with the 50 foot, even though I'm not that far from my house. See if I can get this thing started up. Oh, and it's on. With this orbital sander, I only have one speed. I'm going to take off this little dust attachment because there shouldn't be too much debris coming off of there. And I'm going to attach my most coarse pad to start off with. Then I'm going to move up to the finest pad, just like the sandpaper. So I just pulled up the details for this thing on the Amazon page because they're not labeled in any way, and I want to make sure that I use the right pads first of all. So it's telling me the yellow is my hardest pad. So I'll start with that, then it'll be orange, then white, then blue, then black. So I'm going to start with yellow, probably jump to white, and then end up with black. So I'll stick my yellow cutting pad, the most coarse of all the pads, on the Velcro. And then I'm going to apply a little bit of this Maguire's plastix cleaner and polish just to the pad and dab it on there before I start the sander at all. And I can already see that this thing has cleared up a lot. So I'm gonna apply a little bit more polish just to make sure I'm not getting too dry. And I'm just gonna finish this thing off with the yellow cutting pad, and then I'll move down to the finer pads because I'm already really happy with the results. So this final polishing step is where you're really going to get a sense of your results, because until then the lens is going to be scratched up from the sandpaper that you used. But now you can really start to see the shine come out and the clarity of the headlight lens. And as you can probably tell, this thing's kind of loud. It vibrates super fast, and that's important for applying a lot of friction to the headlight. But the issue is that it's hard to control. So I went with this 5-inch orbital sander and just stuck some pads on top of it. I didn't want to go with the drill because I thought it looked a little janky. Honestly, I think it would be great to have a little 2-inch disc on the end of a drill bit that would provide a lot more control over where you're sanding. Luckily I put this tape down, so I don't think I'm going to do any damage to my paint. Okay, I'm not going to go crazy buffing this wax in because it actually says to initially apply it just with a microfiber cloth. So now I'm going to take the cloth to it, make sure it's a nice fine layer, and then just let it dry to a haze. Okay, so now that all the wax is a nice fine layer on here, it can dry, and that should be pretty much job done. Let's check out our results. The last step I took after I removed the tape was just to use my black finishing buffing pad and a little bit of the wax because I like what this wax was doing. I just wanted to go over around the areas of the edges of the headlights where little deposits of the plastic liquid had kind of collected on the edges, where it had little smudges from drips flying off the buffer, and also where the tape had kind of left a clear strip that hadn't been splattered. So I wanted to just clean up the areas around where I taped off and make it not so noticeable. I think the final product looks pretty great, and for about $50 in materials, a cheap drill attachment, or a sander, you really can't go wrong. I still have plenty of sandpaper, plenty of fluids to do all of this 2 or 3 more times, or for 2 or 3 more cars. So I think overall it's a great investment. It probably took me about an hour and a half, and I'm super happy with these results.